Hello and welcome to my final history presentation on the Ghost Army, also known as the Invisible Force for Good during the Second World War. I also apologize for a bit of static interference. My computer is deciding to pretend to be a jet engine and really can't do a thing to stop it. So let's begin. Now, to begin with, who were who was rather the Ghost Army? They were an army or a unit that was created in World War II on the American side to deceive the enemy into thinking troops would be in a certain location, but in reality they wouldn't. I'll allude to how that was possible in just a moment, but first we should clarify that, or state that this unit, which wasn't actually composed of any soldiers or men that really enlisted in the military to fight. They were made up of art students from universities in New York and Pennsylvania, stage and movie set designers, and I'll get to why that is in a moment as well as using randomly skilled laborers like shoemakers, bartenders, and factory workers, or people that are used to performing a certain task that may be reasonably difficult for long periods of time. Officially, they were called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, or the 23rd for short. What did they do? Before I stated, they fooled the enemy into thinking that there were troops where they actually weren't. And now they did this in three forms of different deception. What they called visual warfare, sonic warfare, and radio warfare. The first aspect of the deception techniques was visual deception. So this is where the movie set and just stage set designers would come into play, because they would make fake vehicles and weapons. So when spy planes would fly over, the planes would be tricked into thinking that they're seeing a bunch of real vehicles. And they would then report intelligence on numbers that were significantly greater than were originally anticipated. At first, the original idea was to take a metal frame and put a wooden cover around it and slide that over a Jeep to make it look like a tank. Now, this worked, but it had a few critical errors. One was that it was extremely heavy, so it inhibited the movement of the Jeep significantly, and it was prone to breakage. Due to the Jeep pulling steep turns going over terrain, the wooden frame would crack. And, your deception isn't really, working if you have a giant crevice running down the center of what you're trying to pass off as a tank. Another thing is that they couldn't really see out of the Jeep, so they couldn't really see where they're going. They could only go in a straight line from where they knew they needed to go from before they put on the frame. The solution to this was they made inflatable vehicles and weapons made out of rubber that they would inflate with air compressors on one day, or on a good day. On a bad day, the 23rd said that they used bicycle pumps, and on really bad days they had their lungs. An entire battalion of vehicles could be set up in about 45 minutes to about an hour. And so they made inflatable weapons such as the M4 Sherman medium tank, which was also the most mass-produced tank on the American side during World War II, and arguably what is the most produced tank during the entire war. So that tank was a commonplace on the battlefield during World War II. So looking at an inflatable version, it would be next to normal. That, as well as the M1A1 artillery piece. There were also inflatable soldiers that were made to man the machines. The soldiers were essentially looked like large saguaro cactuses, if you can imagine, with combat helmets on and trench coats to make them look like a person manning a machine, so they didn't have to use real manpower when they would allow spy planes to fly over and take pictures. Um, Another thing they used was bulldozers to simulate tank tracks. So they would drive a bulldozer up to the approximate location where they're going to set the balloon down, back it up in the exact same direction, and stick the balloon right on top of it and inflate it to make it look like the tank had actually driven along the path. Here is an aerial picture that was taken of a grouping of fake tanks and fake trucks. Everything you see here is just a giant inflatable balloon, uh, and they were held distinct from their other counterparts because they had the large American insignia, which is a large white star and a large white circle all on their back, so you could tell. So Allied planes could tell from the air which ones were real and which ones were fake. Obviously, everything in this photograph is fake. There are 15 to 20 tanks about, and several trucks down there, and you can see the different tank treads that are leading down and leading up to each different tank. Here is the inflatable M1A1 artillery gun compared to the actual M1A1 that was used during war. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, well, how could that fool anyone? But when you're X amount of feet in the air and are flying over, this is going to actually resemble this quite a bit. And usually they'd throw leaves and camouflage over it to kind of hide what appearance they did have when compared to that. And now this is the inflatable M4 Sherman when you compare it to the actual M4 Sherman used in wartime. Now both of these have the short-barreled 76mm gun that was later traded out for a higher velocity 76mm gun, long-barreled, due to the fact that the short-barreled 76 wasn't really good as an anti-tank gun against the German heavy armor machines that they were producing. But that's beside the point. What are you? I don't want you. Get away. Anyways, each inflatable tank weighed around 90 pounds, so it could be easily transported, tipped over, and here you can also see they're inflating it. The second area of focus for the 23rd Special Troops was sonic warfare, which is sound. They focus on making the sounds of the machines that the visual warfare sector were creating. So the visuals of tanks, you have balloons, and last I checked, balloons don't exactly make the sound of a tank. They make the sound of a balloon, which is sound. So the sonic warfare sector of the special 23rd would record sounds such as tanks driving over bridges, machine gun fire, a motor sounding, etc. Sounds that you would generally hear in warfare. And then they would play them over giant speakers, and this would lead the enemy into hearing the sounds of troops that weren't there. They could see the troops and they could hear the troops, but nobody was actually there, hence why they were called the Ghost Army. The sounds, again, they were played on trucks with absolutely massive speakers on them that had a range of an astonishing 15 miles, which, that's impressive for sound, but this is the giant speaker that they had, and it was on a rotating pedestal that could be played in any direction. And they would usually have several of these attached to different trucks, and they'd drive them out right to where the inflatable tanks, inflatable artillery are, and they'd play artillery sounds, they'd play tank sounds, and so the enemy would hear them and quote-unquote pinpoint their location. The third grouping of the 23rd was the radio warfare unit. It is estimated that around that between the years of 1944 and 1945, the Germans intercepted around 85% of all United States radio transmission, and this worked both ways on both sides. We received quite a bit of the Germans' communication. We received the Japanese. The Japanese received ours. It was commonplace and well understood that in 1944 pretty much anything that you said over the radio you could consider had already fallen into enemy hands. The 23rd took this into consideration and used what is normally a bad thing into a good thing, because they would create fake radio transmissions and allow them to fall into enemy hands, and they would report the location, quote unquote, of troops that they could then see, they could hear, and they'd have radio confirmation that the troops were there, but again, in reality, there were no troops there. And there had about 100 radio operators from all over the Allied side employed within the 23rd. Alright, so now we're going to cover the 23rd's utilization in actual warfare, their successes with D-Day and other subsequent invasions. D-Day, the D-Day invasion. Now, the goal of the 23rd was to create a massive fake landing force to draw troops away from the already heavily fortified landing zone of Omaha Beach in Normandy, France, so the Allies would have less opposition when landing, and thus being less casualties on the conjoined American, British, and Canadian forces. The 23rd then created a fake landing mass of around 500 tanks, numerous other guns, and lots of personnel, and stationed them right up close to German-occupied France. They then leaked, quote-unquote, leaked information by pretty much giving radio transmissions to them so they would intercept them, saying that the attack would come on the 6th of June, 1944, at the Pas-de-Calais region in France. Germany's response to this, Hitler got spooked when he heard the data of this ginormous landing force being amassed so close to his border. So he took his largest mass of tanks, the 3rd Panzer Army, as well as a few thousand Wehrmacht soldiers. The Wehrmacht was essentially just Hitler's military as opposed to the SS. And he took them and he moved them about 100 miles northeast of Omaha Beach from Normandy all the way to Pas-de-Calais in anticipation for defending Pas-de-Calais from a massive sea-to-land invasion from the Allies. And subsequently, Omaha Beach was stormed on the same day that the special units of the 23rd said that their invasion was going to come on. And so, even when German troops in Normandy requested reinforcements, Hitler didn't remove his troops from Pas-de-Calais, fearing that the invasion of Omaha Beach was simply a smaller invasion in order to distract the Germans from the real invasion that was going to come at Pas-de-Calais. The entire day, Hitler was anticipating a storm from the Allies to come at Pas-de-Calais, because the 23rd's methods of deception were so incredibly effective that Hitler never sent a single person back to Normandy to help. And as such, again, no invasion ever came due to there being, no real invasion force. There were no real tanks, no real guns, really no real soldiers there. And the Allies successfully took over Omaha Beach in Normandy. You can see here a visual of where Omaha Beach is, and over here is the region of Pas-de-Calais, which is where Hitler anticipated the attack was going to come. Right here is where I just lost the words. The 23rd was stationed. They stationed them alongside this coast of southeastern England in order to kind of spook Hitler into moving his troops from Omaha Beach to Pas-de-Calais, which he subsequently did, which was a understandably devastating move for him. Next up is the success of the invasion of Brest. Now, Brest, France, was an important port city to the Nazi regime. It allowed for trading to take place from the northern Atlantic, and it had multiple different channels leading off into separate rivers that then connected to other rivers all the way through Nazi-occupied Europe. And rivers, as we've learned in history, are wonderful methods of transporting goods. Again, allowed goods to be transferred also along France's entire western seafront. The Allies taking Brest would also be a massive strategic advantage, as it would allow them to control the flow of ships and cut off any German ship that's trying to enter then the different river channels and cut off supply trade to Central Europe via the river system, and that would devastate Nazi Germany's economy as well as boost America's strategic advantage, because it would allow them to station different ships along the rivers as well. So here is a picture of where Brest is when you compare it to where Omaha Beach and Normandy is, and again, Pas-de-Calais is up here. Brest is in the southern region, and right here there are multiple rivers that lead off, and the entire western seafront of France was controlled pretty much from the location of this port. The invasion the idea of the invasion, I should say, was incredibly simple. First, the Allies, or rather the Americans, placed 3 different armored divisions at the very precipice of the Nazi-occupied territory. The two sections of the 23rd would then be stationed alongside the flanks, both eastern and western, to make the invasion of Brest, the invasion force, seem monumentally larger than it already was. The idea was that if they stationed additional troops along the flanks, this would cause enemy troops to reinforce their flanks, and that would allow the main American force with actual weapons to come in a direct path and cut straight through the middle, cutting off both sections of troops on either side in order to take the city. Now, this was also a risky move, as it was the first time that the 23rd was seeing actual combat within the war itself. Before, they had just been used as sort of an intimidation factor, but now they were being stationed on the front lines, and that was a problem, because the 23rd didn't have any real weapons. If the Germans had simply mounted an offensive alongside their flanks to try to take out the enemy, or in this case, the Allies, for us, on the sides, the 23rd would have been completely decimated, because, again, they had no real weapons, and that would have caused reinforcements to come from the Allied side, and that would have also blown the 23rd's cover. However, no such offensive was ever launched by the Germans, and the city of Brest was taken without a single casualty from the 23rd. Next is the invasion, well, not next. Really, the 23rd was involved in numerous other campaigns alongside, in almost exactly the same scenario as had been from Brest. The Rhine River, though, was the last physical barrier between U.S.-liberated Europe and the German capital city of Berlin. This was a monumental moment for the American forces invading Europe. The Germans felt confident because they had the home field advantage. Some Germans were quoted with saying, "Der Rhein wird..." oh boy. Sorry. "Der Rhein wird mit dem Blut von Amerikaner rotgeworfen." There we go. otherwise known as "The Rhine shall run red with the blood of the Americans." There's supposed to be a quotation at the end of that, too. Darn my typing. If the Allies, though, crossed the Rhine, Hitler would be put on the mega defensive from that point on. So, the taking of the Rhine River was essential for America to win the war. However, they didn't possess the invasion force that would be required to break across the Rhine River. So, this is where the 23rd came in, to make an invasion force where there was none. So the plan was to take the 30th and the 79th Battalion of the American Army and position them alongside the Rhine River along the town of Wesel. They would then mount an attack across the Rhine River. But it would be the job of the 23rd to stage an even larger invasion force than the 30th and the 79th and pretend to invade the between the cities of Duisburg and Dusseldorf to stop the additional amount of Nazi troops from going and reinforcing the German troops that were about due north about 10 miles. And again, this was incredibly successful. No Nazi officers or troops ever went north to try to defend that, because they were worried that if they did, then the quote-unquote troops that they were defending the flank against would just wipe right through where they were. But again, no such troops really did exist. And as a result, on the 22nd of March, 1945, U.S. forces crossed the Rhine River and marched on their path to Berlin. Subsequently, 1.5 months later, Germany surrendered after the Russian and American forces met in Berlin. So, in conclusion about the 23rd Special Troops, you're not going to find them in any history book ever, and that's because they're tactics and ideas were kept secret by the U.S. military until about 15 years ago, when the file became declassified. Their tactics were so efficient that some people that were fighting alongside them didn't even realize that the Ghost Army even existed until the file was declassified and the veterans read about it. Without the tactics of the 23rd, multiple different advances by the Americans would have resulted in either devastating defeats or a lot more lives lost. In my opinion, D-Day probably wouldn't have even been possible because of the amount of troops that were taken from the Normandy beach and shifted over to Pas de Calais. If they had stayed there, a likelihood is the invasion force of the Americans would have been decimated and stopped right at Normandy Beach, and we would probably have not set foot in Nazi-occupied Europe for quite a long time after that, or even if all. So as such, even though they weren't actual troops, and even though they quote-unquote weren't there in the first place, the successes of the 23rd played an important part in ending the World War II conflict within Europe. And thus ends my presentation on the 23rd Special Troops, also known as the Ghost Army, the invisible force for good during the Second World War.